Hello and welcome once again to a Tactic Thursday here on Premier Injuries. And just before we get into this week's discussion, I do have to say, remember to like, share and subscribe. And of course, it is Tactic Thursday. I do have our resident tactical analyst, Tristan Thomas, with us today. And we'll be talking about the title leaders, Manchester City. I think a lot of focus has been paid on their sensational defensive performances this season, which is probably something we will get onto in a later episode. But I want to turn my attention on the potential return of Sergio Aguero to the side, and maybe the shocking position that he's not actually been missed. At the start of the season, it seemed to show a bit of a slow start for the side there. They were mid-table with trouble scoring, but then they've just hit another level. But yes, before we get into the chats here, Tristan, how are you doing today? And have you enjoyed watching Manchester City this season?
Yeah, I'm doing very, very well, thanks. I'm looking forward to another good conversation about a very, very good team, especially since our last conversation about Brighton. Since then, they've had a couple of calls and the internet has melted, with the XG and chances and all this kind of thing. So hopefully we don't have the same curse on Man City, because they've been a fantastic team to watch over the last few weeks and months. For this whole kind of middle stage of the season, Pep Guardiola's really got them playing very, very well once again, and they're probably a similar level to the peak that they were at a couple of seasons ago when they won the title last. So very, very good team, playing some wonderful football in all competitions, and a team that's still competing on all fronts in all competitions in March once again.
Well, I think if we were to have a curse, the red side of Manchester and the red side of Liverpool wouldn't mind too much, because they're running away with the title at the moment, 12 points, and possibly could be 15 because we are recording before the Wolves game this week. But yes, before we actually analyse what's happened to City this season, I actually do want to talk through some historical data and the tactical role that Aguero used to have at Manchester City before they've adapted their style this season. So just kind of looking through the number crunching and things that I've done over the past kind of week, I found it quite interesting that in 2017-18, there was a slight improvement in the side of Manchester City with Aguero in the side. But then in 2018-19, the side were a lot better with him playing up front. But then again, the next season, which was also last season in terms of 2019-20, again, with and without Aguero, Manchester City was still a fantastic attacker. And they were every season, but his missingness in certain games was not as pronounced in 2019-20, and certainly not this season. So what can that kind of data explain there, Tristan? Is this kind of narrative around Aguero and him being missing from the Manchester City squad before this season, was that kind of overplayed? Does the Pep style almost insulate the squad from any people getting injured?
I think that would be a fair point to make, certainly, that the style of play and the quality that they have, and Pep's adaptability, where he's been at clubs before, Barcelona, for example, playing without a recognised centre forward, that it doesn't make a huge difference to the system with Aguero leaving the team. Maybe he's injured, but obviously he's their best centre forward, and probably their only world-class centre forward in the Pep Guardiola time, because Gabriel Jesus hasn't quite developed at the level that many people expected him to when he first arrived in England a few years ago. So they missed kind of those expected goals, if you want to look at it from a data point of view. How many expected goals do you have on the pitch at a certain time? Players that can get into good shooting positions regularly and finish those chances as well. And that's why Ilkay Gundogan's been a bit of a revelation this season. Although I actually remember reading in an interview with Guardiola a couple of seasons ago how he compared Gundogan to Lampard, I think, like how he can find space in the box and has that recognition of where the ball's going to be and getting into the right place at the right time, and then being able to finish the chances as well, which is vitally important. So they've kind of found their goals and found the last touch through him this season as well, which has been doubly impressive with De Bruyne's injury in the last couple of months. So yes, Aguero is a very, very good player, world-class player, and important to a club. And any club in the world would miss him to a certain extent if he left. But yes, it's not the end of the world, and it's certainly not a one-man team or a one-man attack where if Aguero is missing, City can't create or score chances.
So let's look at the tactics of the pre-kind of Aguero era, where he was quite important to that Manchester City attack, as we've kind of opened out there with some of the data that I've put on screen as well. Let's look at the way that the team used to play before his big injury, before he's kind of not been used in the side. You've put together a video that, again, I'm going to put up on screen here, Tristan. Can you talk us through the style of Pep and Manchester City with Serge in the side?
Yeah, so this graphic here is their lineup against Leicester in February last year. So just pre-COVID, Aguero was still in the team. And they were playing kind of a 4-2-3-1-ish shape, or an asymmetric 4-3-3 in midfield. Mendy would be the left back, obviously pushing high onto the last line like he does very well in attack very often, which meant Bernardo Silva would then come into the left kind of half space, left channel area. De Bruyne would operate anywhere, really, as usual, picking up the ball in build-up and moving in between the lines also. Mahrez would be wide out on the right wing. Gundogan would come into the right half space because how City and Guardiola like to play is they want players occupying kind of 5 imaginary vertical lanes along the pitch. So yeah, you could imagine the pitch being split up with lines. So there's 5 vertical columns. They want at least one attacking player in each of them, which creates kind of like a 3-2-5 or 2-3-5 shape in possession. You'd have Walker coming into the right half space inside area as well to protect against transitions and counter-attacks. And then Rodri is the holding midfielder as well. So Leicester played a back 5 around this kind of time. So as they went into their 5-3-2 shape, Aguero's positioning, and because he's such a renowned goal threat, and also his movement and knowing where to be and what positions to take up is so good, he can attract 2 or even 3 defenders towards him. So he's like moving into offside positions, for example, behind the line, would then create space in between the lines for Kevin De Bruyne and the other players to get into, receive the ball into, make assists and key passes from. So yeah, Aguero's kind of presence on the last line and in between defenders is very, very important, not only to create that space in between the lines, but then also to create space either side. So the other team's playing a back 4, that would be the space in between the centre backs and full backs for runners from midfield, Gundogan, for example, Bernardo Silva, or even wingers, Mahrez, Sterling, or Mendy was pushing up from left back to make runs into like a space just to the sides of the box, or just inside the box, high up on the touchline, like a cut-back sort of area where they can play the ball into there, then cut the ball back. So yeah, Aguero's positioning is fantastic at bringing defenders towards him, and I think even kind of subconsciously, defenders in the box, when he's in there, would get dragged towards him, and fullbacks would find themselves going 2 or 3 yards closer to him than they would like to be, purely because of how good his movement is and how big a threat he is in front of goal. And that obviously then creates space for other players. It allows them to cross the ball as well, and have players arriving. So yeah, a very important player, and it kind of occupies 2 players of the opposition, like I said, and then creates more space for the other guys.
This is the interesting thing that I find with Aguero, is that sometimes people simplify him as just an out-and-out goal scorer, but he's incredibly clever. And I think you've explained there that he created that space for the wingers, which is obviously a hallmark of Pep ball. looking at the kind of data, the chances created, his assists, and his XGI, normally he's not really involved in terms of data like expected assists. Do you think that sometimes with the data, with XGI and chances created, that sometimes this ability to create chances just from pure movement is completely overlooked?
Yeah, that's an interesting point regarding data as a whole, actually, that the players runs off the ball and movements. I remember like Samuel Eto'o was one of the best at it, making runs into the box. That's quite an outdated example. Apologies if there's any like but his runs into the box were fantastic, and runs to the side to create space for others were brilliant. And yeah, Aguero's doesn't do that to the same sort of extent in terms of running off the ball, but he's just positioning and knowing where to be, to move defenders and occupy spaces, which is obviously helped by Guardiola's knowledge of the game. Yeah, it is fantastic. So yeah, that's definitely in statistics an area where there isn't really yet a way we can measure this. You could potentially talk about overall plus minus. So a team creates this much expected goals, or yeah, this many chances when a player's on the pitch, and then you could say, okay, this player isn't getting like stats or isn't getting the numbers in their favour. However, the overall team are performing better when they're on the pitch. But in football, plus minus for a variety of reasons isn't a kind of a great route to go down compared to basketball, for example. So yeah, it's not something we can measure specifically, but it's certainly something that Aguero does unbelievably well, and it is very important to Man City when he's in the team.
So with Aguero in the team, City were a fantastic attack, and now this season without him, they've done the same without a recognised forward. Just before this season started, and actually in the early part of last season, when Liverpool were absolutely, romping it to the title, Manchester City were a little bit left behind. I kind of came up with a postulation that maybe Manchester City were in a transitional period. Now, obviously, the injury to Aguero created the problem, and Pep has done it again. He's come up with a fantastic solution, but he's probably more attuned to the fact that Aguero is getting to that age where he basically needs to be replaced, or something needs to happen in Manchester City. So I kind of talked through, and I'm going to put this graph on screen to kind of explain it, but there's a thing called the sigmoid curve, and this is where a team kind of go up and up the scale there on curve one, and then they enter a transition period where they've basically peaked, and they either have to change their style or their players, or something has to happen. Otherwise, as you can see there on curve one, they then go into severe regression. So on curve 2, number A, there's that kind of drop-off period there, but then they go into another exponential growth. Do you think this is something that's happened with Manchester City? Because we've seen the introduction of Cancelo, a ridiculous but very strange kind of right back slash wing back kind of combination. We've seen the introduction of Diaz. There's been an overhaul in the way that the team do play this season.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, but by the way, any kind of Telegraph journalists that were watching have definitely now turned off after all this chat about sigmoid curves and expected goals. Yeah, like they've rebranded themselves a tiny bit. They've changed a few things here and there. A big appointment actually was Juan Malillo as Pep's new assistant to replace Mikel Arteta, or maybe he came in at the same time Arteta was there. But yeah, Leo came in as like a very, very well-renowned coach that Pep actually kind of worked or spoke to a lot when he was becoming or making the transition between being a player and a coach. So I think he's maybe helped with a few ideas and been kind of a sounding board for Guardiola. But yeah, they've changed the way or the positions that they take up in build up. They bring a lot more players deeper to the ball now. So they have Cancelo that pushes from right back where he normally plays. He played left back against Borussia Mönchengladbach in the Champions League a couple of weeks ago, which was fantastic. But he moves into a very central role, like an inverted fullback role, which is something City have used a lot. But not like to this extent, especially in build-up. Like the way Cancelo roams around the midfield area, moving from his right back position, is like very, very unique. Yeah, different to what they've done before. They've really taken that to a new extreme. And then John Stones moves into like a right back position. And Zinchenko moves very deep on the left side, and then they drag out the opposition, the opposition forwards, and then there's more spaces in the flanks, so they're progressing more in the flanks and build up. And they're having the wingers very, very wide in the last few games, which has helped because Pep mentioned actually that he played a few games with the wingers moving into the half spaces in the centre a bit more. And then like the number 8s would push and go into the wide spaces, or the fullbacks would kind of time overlaps, which isn't something they really did in the first couple of seasons when he was at Man City. But they've gone back to what they've done before, which is have the wingers very, very wide. Sterling has been very good in this recent run. Foden, when he plays out wide, has been excellent. Mahrez as well is a very good winger. If you want someone to kind of hug the touchline, then move in onto his left foot. They've done that, and those guys have got a lot of space through having no recognised striker drop into midfield as well.
So, adding to this discussion here, you've nicely described what's happened, but you've also put together a visual representation. So just talk us through what we can see on screen now as to this change in style of play without Aguero, but even really without a proper recognised striker, and playing a very unique new system.
Yeah, so you can see the system that's very similar. It's still a 4-3-3. With Phil Foden. I think this is the Liverpool game, this graphic, their lineup from that game, with Foden playing as the false 9. But they've had De Bruyne take up this role previous to his injury, Gundogan as well, Bernardo Silva as well, actually, in a recent game. It's the 4-3-3 shape, with the wings staying a lot wider and Foden coming very deep into midfield, not just like in between the lines like a normal false 9, but yeah, really, really deep, as I mentioned. And then Cancelo, like I said, comes into that holding midfield role, or even attacking midfield role at times, and it gives them like 5 players in the central column or in the central area, including the half spaces also. So that really gives them that overload in midfield, makes them very difficult to defend against. Means the opposition midfielders can't get tight man for man, so they have to communicate a lot, and then the opposition forwards have to either drop back and press players in midfield, and mark players in midfield, which gives the centre backs and goalkeeper more time on the ball and allows them to progress up the field, or the forwards can kind of have to cover shadows. That means they block the passes into the midfield, while also pressing the centre backs that are on the ball, which is a very difficult role, requires great intelligence, and then also we open up spaces in different areas because the forwards that are pressing are so worried about what's going on behind them. This 5 in midfield also means the opposition fullbacks, if they're playing a 4-3-3 or 4-4-2, would have to, or would often go to get tight, or at least consider the position of Gundogan here. So you can see number 2, which would be Alexander-Arnold, is pressing Gundogan, which gives Sterling out wide more space, because again, City put in 5 players on the last line in like a 3-2-5 shape or 2-3-5 shape, and building through the thirds a lot easier because of the overload in midfield, and then having loads of space on the wings as well because of the fullback's narrow position.
So let's describe the Gundogan role, because this is the most amazing thing. He's gone from a ball-winning architect to basically the biggest goal threat in the side. That's kind of expressed in XGI, XG. And there was kind of a shift. The one game week he was kind of still playing that role, and then all of a sudden he scored 11 goals in 12 games, and people are really talking about him. I think this is quite fascinating what you've described there as almost a shift sometimes to a 3-1-3-3 or a 3-2-2-3, and the wingers pull out the full-backs, central forward player often drops back, and this allows Gundogan to make the runs between the fullback and the centre-backs late into the box. Is this something that Gundogan's always had and we've just kind of been sleeping on this? Or is this a new role that Pep has kind of moulded him to do, much like he's done with João Cancelo?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I think Gundogan has always had this like in his locker. Like at Dortmund, he was not a prolific goal scorer, but he still had the ability to get into chances when needed, and it's something that, as I mentioned, Guardiola kind of identified with him and spoke about with him in the past. Gundogan like never really got a real run of games at Man City through like little injury problems, and also the fact that they have, I could believe one of the world's best midfields and also attacking lineups. So it was very difficult for him to get a run in the side. And then kind of Aguero being missing has allowed him to get into a role, either through another midfield player moving into that false nine position, or himself being in that position, like we saw at times against Tottenham. So he's got a very, very good recognition of when to make the movement into the box. It's not like he's just like goal hanging the whole time or is standing in between the two centre backs like Aguero is. He's like, the timing of his runs into the box are very, very intelligent. City don't play many passes through the centre into a striker. I mean, it doesn't really work unless you've got a striker that can play off the shoulder or is very, very good in the tight gaps between defenders, a bit like Aguero is. So they in the final third, they look to play into like the channels or into the wide areas, and then he can make that run and get into the right space at the right time. And their kind of system without a recognised striker really gives the opposition centre-backs lots of questions about where should they go. Should they step into midfield to mark someone? Should they move out and help the fullback defend against the winger, etc.? So him kind of moving into that blind side out of nowhere really shocks teams and allows him to get as many goals as he has done so far.
Do you think that another kind of foible about Manchester City has been their improvement in dead ball situations? A couple of seasons ago, they were criticised on their ability to put those away and sometimes defend them as well. Now they've got 10 goals scored. It's not the most in the Premier League this season. I think they're 2 off the most at the top there. But it is an improvement from 2 seasons ago. Does that marginal gain there actually fill some of the Aguero-shaped hole in the team?
Yeah, that's interesting. Obviously, Ruben Diaz coming in at centre-back, along with John Stones coming back from injuries, made them a big threat at set pieces. Well, obviously, for a large part of last season, you had Fernandinho playing with various players at centre-back, and Fernandinho obviously isn't a huge threat in the opposition box from set pieces. It's been something that they've used to get goals in certain moments. It was interesting, I think, against West Ham, was it, that 2 centre-backs scored the first 2 goals. So it's amazing that everyone's kind of popping up with goals. And who needs Sergio Aguero, right?
Well, this is the memes going around at the moment, that there must be a debate in the Manchester City squad. Do Diaz and Stones now kind of sit deep and defend, or do they go for the golden ball? Because they're both scoring lots of goals at the moment. Turning the attention back to Aguero, though, and another thing that I think is a worry for the FPL community is the injury history of the man. I think for me, it saddened me to kind of look at his injury history. And of course, we are Premier Injuries, so you can find all this kind of data from us. We're the kind of best to come for that injury insight into Aguero and other players as well. But looking at it, so much time has been lost to injuries for possibly one of the greatest, if not the greatest, kind of forward in Premier League history. It's really sad. And looking at it from 2017 onwards, kind of where my data starts from in terms of the attacking data, he had a rib fracture, he had knee surgery, he had a second bit of knee surgery, groin strain, quadriceps strain, meniscus tear, which I think is the really big one that's kind of caused all the problems subsequently, hamstring strain, knee inflammation, and then recently he has had the COVID-19 virus to kind of recover from as well. And just before we kind of continue our discussions, I'm going to hand it to Ben and Raj for info about Aguero and maybe why the FPL community shouldn't rely on him.
We, of course, are joined by the fantasy doc himself, Raj. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. How about yourself?
Excellent. Yeah, very good, Raj. Raj, I just want to keep this one very short and sweet. We want to talk about Sergio Aguero. The Argentine was named in Pep Guardiola's starting 11 for the first time in what seems like an eternity last weekend as he works his way back from his latest setback, latest illness, latest period of self-isolation. What we want to know within the fantasy community is Sergio Aguero a player that we can now rely on as a fantasy asset, or do you think, you know, we still have to treat this player with kid gloves going forward, knowing what you know about him, his injury history, and also Pep?
Yeah, I'd anticipate the kid gloves part just because we've seen what happened before with his body breaking down when he was introduced. And so they may be more conservative. They've been more conservative with his rehab in general. And I think they'll be more conservative with his playing time here as well. And multiple reasons for that. Firstly, the fact that they do now have a cushion in the Premier League, so they don't have to force him on the pitch. They don't need that spark they might have needed before. And also positionally, something we touched on is that you're seeing players like Foden, you're seeing players like Sterling now playing in as a false nine. So you're seeing Pep already make some of those adjustments, whereas before Aguero was, you know, if he's healthy, he's playing no matter what.
Yeah, and that's the worry when we're talking about premium assets in that, you know, attacking third. And I'm very much of you. I think we need to sort of just sit back and just see how this one evolves with Sergio Aguero. And it's not time to pull the trigger quite yet. But Raj, listen, thank you once again. Brilliant insight. Check him out on 3CB Performance, social media, YouTube. The guy is an absolute legend.
So bringing it back there, Tristan, Dr. Raj has kind of explained there that his minutes might be managed. There might be a more conservative approach there with Aguero. Is this something that you kind of reflect as well, that Aguero is not going to be that kind of huge player that the FPL community used to rely on? You know, people, when they bet on the game as well, they kind of bet on him to score almost every game week. Is this almost going to be the end of an era now where we don't have Aguero in our sides? We don't captain him. He's just too unreliable. Maybe somebody like Sterling should have our attention instead.
I guess it's a situation where we'll wait and see whether Aguero can kind of stage a bit of a renaissance once again. Like you said, he's injured a lot. And when he comes back from injury, normally it takes him a few games to get into the swing of things. But yeah, he's come back time and time again to be a very, very important key player for Man City. So it could happen again. He could go through a little purple patch of 6 to 8 games where he's scoring lots of goals. And then as an FPL player myself, you kind of try to recognise the signs of that early on and then get him in your team for that kind of period, and then kind of notice when his form's starting to drop off and then take him out. So I wouldn't say he'd be a staple in like an FPL team going forward, purely like for the reasons you mentioned. But at the same time, he's still playing in the team that creates maybe the most chances of anyone in the world. So, and he's going to get goals. He's a top finisher. And I'm not sure he's the kind of player in that system that is massively reliant on his like physical kind of capabilities. You know, his awareness and ability to finish are very, very high. And you've seen like Suarez, for example, this season, who's kind of a lot deep into his 30s than Aguero, be fantastic for like Atletico Madrid. So I think with modern sports science, even more injured players can, you know, continue to score goals more into their 30s.
Is another consideration though with Aguero is he usually is hooked off around the 60th, 70th minute. So he doesn't often see out the game. Looking at his subs on and subs out data, In 2017-18, he was subbed out 9 times. The season after that, 23 times. And in the season after that, last season, he was subbed out 10 times. Would that be something as well as a consideration in terms of the FPL squad, that yes, he's going to be in a team that scores a lot, but that puts almost the ceiling, because obviously teams score the most goals, or most goals are scored in games in those last minutes where legs are tired and heads are tired.
Yeah, definitely. It's the classic Pep rotation, isn't it, in fantasy football that everyone dreads, but which is always going to be an issue with Man City players, especially him. And as you mentioned, he will be used more sparingly because of his injuries and because of his age now as well, and the depth and quality they have in the side. So yeah, no, I would say that's certainly a slight concern, but in many games, especially when they hit top form, they're already 4-0 up by the 70th minute. So you probably would have bagged 1 or 2 by then anyway. So yeah, no, it's certainly something to consider.
This one final question is more picking your brain about maybe where do Pep look to a striker in the summer, because I think Jesus hasn't stepped up to the mark. Aguero is coming to the end of the career. We don't even know if he will be at the club after the end of the season because his contract is running out. But there's also the second question of, will teams in the Premier League and around Europe now be worried that Pep has found another way to play and he doesn't need a striker necessarily?
Yeah, I'm sure Pep won't be saying to the board at Man City and Cheeky Bergestan, the sporting director, I found a way to play without a striker. Certainly, if he's offered Erling Haaland and he says no, I'll just put Bernardo Silva in as a false 9 instead. I don't think that's very likely. I think Haaland is the big name, right? That he's been linked with every big club, obviously, because he's going to be the biggest goal scorer over the next 10 years in world football from all the signs we're seeing right now. So, of course, it's been linked with Man City with the money they have and the coach they have, that I'm sure Haaland would love to work under and would score a lot of goals and learn a lot from. So, I think if they can make that signing, they're going to be absolutely unstoppable. And the other one as well is Lionel Messi, potentially. Will he go back to reunite with Pep Guardiola? And then, like you said, he's not like a real striker, so maybe they are kind of playing the system that they've played for stages of this season before Jesus' recent run in the scene, where they are playing with a false 9 and the wingers are providing lots of the threat, and Messi kind of sits in that deeper role, drifting into midfield, playing passes in behind for Sterling and Mahrez, etc. So, either Haaland or Messi obviously would be incredible players to see in the Premier League, and I think Man City will go big and recruit in the summer, and there won't be any real kind of COVID's financial implications that we saw in the last few months with other clubs and other leagues. I don't think that really applies to City. So, I would love to see Haaland and Messi with Guardiola next season. And surely that's another league title for them.
Maybe this season has all been in preparation for when Messi comes, and just the tactics have been tweaked for when he leaves Barcelona and joins the Manchester City side. But as always, I do have to thank you for your time today, Tristan, and just remind people where to find you out and the great work that you do over on Twitter and also at 11 Hacks.
Yes, I'm at Tristan T Coach on Twitter. So please get in touch there. Send me a DM, and if you want to chat about football, fantasy, tactics, anything like that, I'm happy to help.
But for now, that is the end of our Tactic Thursday for this week. We'll be back again soon, so make sure that you like, subscribe and share this video with your friends, because we'll be talking about tactics through the end of this season and into next one as well, explaining all sorts of foibles and interests in the Premier League.